Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Welcome to the November 22 PowerShell Community Call, where we gather as a community to discuss all things related to PowerShell and tend to its care and feeding. Hey, let's keep in mind that when we communicate, there are actually humans attached to the other side of this, so let's be kind and remember our code of conduct. We have an action-packed agenda today, but before we get started, remember you can post your questions both in this chat and you can post the questions to the community call issue in GitHub. I put a message out just before the meeting started that has the links to those. I'd like to start off with a couple of important notes before we get into the agenda. First of all, this is the last community call of the year. Yay! So enjoy your holidays. We look forward to seeing you once again starting in January of 2023, which again, the third Thursday of every month. And I'd like to say congrats to the community and to the team for all of the work leading up to the recently released PowerShell 7.3, our non-LTS release for 2023. We'll continue to move forward on 7.4 LTS as we work through next year. In fact, to get us started on our, I think I said it was an action-packed agenda. To get us started on our action-packed agenda, let's go talk to Steve Lee about the recent release of 7.3. Hey, Steve, what's going on with 7.3?
All right, so hopefully everyone by now has saw the announcements and the blog post about the 7.3 GA release, GA being general availability. So this is the supported release out of preview. As Jason mentioned, this is a non-LTS release. So one thing that I want to make sure everyone is aware is that the 7.3 release will actually have 18 months of support aligned with .NET 7, which is also a non-LTS release. And that also brings up, before I talk a little bit more about 7.3, a reminder that 7.0, which is still an LTS release, will be out of support on December 3rd. And then 7.2, which is the most up-to-date LTS release, is still in support until November 2024. So there's 2 more years of that one, okay? And then 7.4, with being an even number, would be our next LTS release. So now, as far as 7.3 is concerned, I know that there was some discussion on Twitter about an Azure PowerShell issue, and Damien will be talking about that later today. So I'm not going to cover that. However, we are actively looking at any reported issues for 7.3, and we are triaging them and trying to address them. So we do plan to, I believe, have a servicing release already for 7.3.1 in December. So that should address some of those issues. But as more issues come in, we'll see if we can get those fixed for future 7.3 updates. Of course, they'll roll into 7.4. We may not have a 7.4 preview until January. I think that covers everything I wanted to make sure I cover here. If you have any questions, feel free to just put in the chat and I can respond in the chat window. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Now, folks, I don't know if you've been using our predictors that we ship with PS Readline. I certainly hope that you are. The prediction model has been very helpful for a lot of people, and we're working on other areas for that prediction model. And to talk about some of these new areas, like the feedback provider, Dongbo, are you online? Are you here?
Yes, I'm here, Jason. I'm gonna share my screen. Hi, my name is Dongbo. I'm here to demo something we call feedback provider. It's something we want to use to replace the existing command arrow suggestions. Like you might be familiar with something like this. So see the suggestion over here. Currently, the suggestions are hard-coded into the console host, so there's no way for you to extend it other than change the PowerShell. And there are 2 of them currently in use. One is this fuzzy matching suggestion. Another one is like for example, show. Yeah, because I have a show arrow PS1 file in the same location, but I'm not using the / before that when I call it. So there's another suggestion currently, hard-coded, to check that, okay, you are using a show arrow PS1, but you do have a show arrow PS1 in the current folder that give you the suggestion. So this is the current status of the suggestion framework. It's hard-coded, there's no way to extend it. So we thought that it's gonna be good if we can just reuse the same subsystem plugin, which we are using for the prediction to support extensible feedback provider. So it's like to replace the current arrow suggestions with a new implementation based on the subsystem plugin. And today we have we're supposed to have 2 built-in feedback providers, but we decided to move this Unix command of font provider out. But I'm gonna demo what, how it looks like right now. So here I have a private build. Well, the code has been checked into the latest master branch, so it will be available in the 7.4 first preview. Even though I don't know when that what it's gonna be. So here, say I'm gonna call a Python. That turns out I don't have the Python available. So currently they have 2 feedback providers. So one is the same one, like the fuzzy matching suggestion where we actually see over here. Well, so if I do this, the same fuzzy fuzzy matching suggestion. The other one is what we call Unix command of font. Like if you are using Bash, you should be familiar with that. So if I do Python recipe y, in Bash you're going to see this this suggestions. Like you cannot find it, but this is a way to install it, or you can also use this. So what happens is that they actually use something called there's a handler. Well, it's a Bash script. It's by default it's registered within the Bash, handling the situation where a command is not found. So it's basically just calling a command called command not found, and just print out the message returned from the command not found command. So we are like basically doing the same thing here in PowerShell, and we give you this. So there's another, this is the other feedback provider. We call it Unix command not found provider. And the better thing is that, like, with the prediction plugin and the feedback plugin, you can actually make them like implement one plugin to serve 2 purposes. So in this case, the command not found plugin, it's a feedback provider, and it's also a prediction. It's also a predictor. So whenever it gets some information about suggestions, it can use those information for prediction. So next, as a user, when I see this suggestion, the next thing I want to do is to install Python maybe. So I'm gonna do this, and you can see that it's automatically showed up in the prediction. And if I change to list view, it's there, and the source is command not found. And if I do PS subsystem, get PS subsystem, you can see that now we actually have a plugin registered for command predictor called command not found, and the same one is also registered as a feedback provider. So basically, it's a feedback provider, but it also serves as a predictor. So whenever it has something to suggest, it can use the same information for prediction results. And give you the fluent experience, so that when you see that, okay, I can do this, then I'm gonna do it. The next thing is that it's done for you. So we think this is gonna provide better experience to the interactive user of PowerShell. And currently, like in the master branch, the Unix command not found like plugin is not registered because we don't want to build into PowerShell. We thought it's going to be better to move it into the Unix completer module, but it's not done yet. But it will be, it definitely will be done like during the 7.4 development. That's it.
Wow, thanks, Dongbo. So the way I like to think about this is, predictors, the point of the predictions are trying to help you be successful, but, failures are going to occur. The feedback providers, well, that's kind of like snatching success out of the jaws of defeat. I really like that. Thanks, Dongbo. Appreciate it. So let's move on to some updates on the PS Gallery statistics. Amber, are you here today?
I am here.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I just had some quick updates specifically on statistics for the gallery. We were informed by the community that we are starting to have statistics issues again. And I just wanted to give a quick update on that. Our statistics pipeline is pretty outdated, pretty complex. And it's something that I think we've been prioritizing, basically just updating, finding a new way to actually have more reliable statistics. That said, we don't know when exactly we are going to have this particular issue resolved. I did kind of want to provide a workaround for not having statistics on the gallery itself. Feel free, anyone can email psgallerysupport@microsoft.com. And those of us who actually work on the gallery can actually run queries to find specific download counts. So if there's some kind of specific information that you're looking for, feel free to email us and we can just kind of provide you those numbers in the interim. Again, we are prioritizing this issue. We just don't really know when we're going to have this completely resolved. So that's about it for that. If you have any other questions related to stats, feel free to open up an issue on GitHub, on the gallery's GitHub page, or email, again, PSG support@microsoft.com, and we can help you with any issues that you're facing.
Thanks for the update, Amber. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Now let's chat a little bit about OpenSSH 9.1. Tess, how are you?
Great, thanks. Yeah, I'm not sure I've ever actually introduced myself on a community call, but I'm Tess. I've been with the team for about a year and a half, and I work on OpenSSH. Our November update is that we are actively working on the 9.1 release. We've pulled in the changes from upstream and are just working to update some dependencies. We still have some manual testing and compliance work to do on our side before we can get the release out. So we don't have a specific date for the release yet, but just wanted to highlight that it is being worked on. Some other OpenSSH things, we've been working on some housekeeping in the repos, and Paul has spearheaded moving over our GitHub CI from AppBear to Azure DevOps. So just wanted to give a thank you to Paul for that. And then one other thing with Windows Inbox, we have an open work item for the SSH server and Windows updates. There's an issue with the startup type not being retained after a Windows update, and we have also put in a fix for that. I don't know when that will be broadly available either, just because the Windows folks handle the release schedules for that, but keep an eye out, and happy to answer any other OpenSSH questions that folks may have.
Thanks, Tess. Appreciate it. The next topic, well, this one's all mine, is Crescendo 1.1.0 preview. So I'm really excited to be able to talk to you about this. We're getting close to releasing the first preview of Crescendo 1.1.0. And I'm going to just tell you just briefly a little bit about it. And Jim, I see that you're online. Please feel free to just jump right in at any moment. First of all, I want to thank everyone that has provided feedback for Crescendo. We spoke to many of the module authors that have been publishing to the gallery, and many of you that have been filing issues into GitHub. This release is based upon your feedback, your ideas, and well, your suggestions. And I just want to thank you very, very much for the great conversations and the enlightenment that you gave to us. Now, to start off, there is a new schema. So we've updated the schema, and we've added so that we could add some new features to it. And let me just say that one of the features that we've added is to bypass the output handler entirely. It's kind of interesting. We found some scenarios where native commands change their output based upon whether they're sending to a pipeline or to the screen. As a matter of fact, if you look at our issues, we were running across a program called Pastel, is such a program that it outputs its graphical color information to the screen, so it makes a pretty graphic, but when you send it to a pipeline, it gets a single line of text. Well, with Crescendo, it's always like sending to a pipeline, so we wanted you to have an escape hatch where you could make the decision to bypass the output handling. We've also included a couple of other features, like we've included argument transformation for parameter values so that they can be translated with value key pairs. And we've improved error handling for the native commands and many more of your suggestions. And Jim, like I said, if you want to jump in and in particular, or if you all want to ask any questions while Jim's around, please feel free on this release. So we look forward to getting this preview out, possibly as soon as next week. We're really trying. And please keep up with the feedback. We've been very appreciative and grateful for all of the things that you've shared with us. So thanks very much. Jim, this is your opportunity to jump in and say hello.
I'm not going to say nothing.
There you go. Thank you, sir. All righty, folks.
Hey, Jason, before you move on,
yeah.
camera back on. Hey, I just want to jump in and Jim had actually just today volunteered to talk at the London user group in January, I think it is, specifically a deep dive into Crescendo, which is I'm bringing it up right now. So if you're interested in that, I expect more information to come out from probably Gail sometime soon.
Outstanding. I didn't know that. Thank you, Jim. Oh, that's fantastic. And look for more deep dives on Crescendos too, because it's great. Thanks. So let's talk a little bit about VS Code updates for November. Hey, Andy, how you doing today?
Hey there, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Awesome.
So this is going to be a short little blurb on the latest update. So we just pushed out a stable update. This is the v2022.11.0. That is the first stable update for November. This has actually been in incubation for a solid number of weeks through October. When we did the October release, we had not used the latest preview. So this has like 3 or 4 sets of preview releases and testing that have gone into this. Really, primarily, it attempted to focus on like the client side of things. We paid back a bunch of technical debt on the client. We have our TypeScript code base now being compiled in strict mode for the TypeScript compiler. And with the fresh, new, modern ESLint linter also in strict mode, this helped us like eliminate a lot of bugs, find a lot of dead code, really give the client side a good old-fashioned cleanup. I'm pretty happy with the work that we did there, and it means that we can like make improvements on the client side a lot more easily going forward. And then on top of that, there's a number of great bug fixes, as always, especially on the server side of things. Many of you might have noticed a regression late in the last release on the on-idle handler. We thought we were fixing it. We did literally the opposite. The fix for that has been pushed out to stable, and we now have that covered in a pair of regression tests, not just for an on-idle handler registered in a profile, which is where we were testing, but also when you register it outside of a profile just in this session. But we managed to figure out how to get tests around that, so we shouldn't break that again, which is great. I love having those regression tests. Another huge thing that we fixed is kind of an embarrassing one, but our pipeline was silently overwriting our release bits with debug bits when we ran the test. So we specifically were building the server in release mode. That was great. We did invoke build configuration release. We thought things were good, and then we just invoked the tests. And this silently just rebuilt everything in debug mode, which isn't the end of the world. In like all honesty, like it obviously was working mostly fine, but it did lead to it being less performant than it could be because release mode comes with lots of optimizations and it compiles out code that could potentially not belong there. For instance, there's a developer flag called wait for debugger. This is a valid flag that we use as developers to attempt to debug the extension. When you turn on the setting in VS Code, it causes the server to sit there and spit out the PID in a loop so that we can grab our debugger, give it the PID, and attach to it. And then when it attaches, it moves forward. That's how we debug the extension, but it was only supposed to be available to us developers in debugger mode. And for some reason, and we haven't gotten to the bottom of this, we found a lot of people had that setting accidentally turned on. When questioned, they just didn't remember turning it on. It wasn't supposed to do anything in production, but that is now fixed. And again, with a pair of regression tests, both on the server-side pipeline and the client-side pipeline, we pull out the DLL that we're about to stick in the extension binary, and we check that it was compiled in release mode and not debug mode, because I do not ever want something like that to happen again. It's kind of embarrassing, I'll be honest, but it's fixed, and I love getting stuff fixed. And finally, probably the most exciting bit of all right here is a really long-standing bug that a lot of people just would refer to as PowerShell Editor Services dry IOC error. This would come up when users would try to use the extension with Windows PowerShell, which, as we've always kind of said, is sort of best effort since Windows PowerShell itself is in a bit of a maintenance mode, and being that it's built on .NET Framework and not .NET Core, it doesn't have assembly load context. It doesn't let us isolate dependencies. We're entirely dependent on the global assembly cache, and therein lied a huge problem for us. So we have a shared dependency. I'm trying to remember what it was called. I think it was System Threading Tasks, which comes from the .NET Framework. Kind of. You can also install it as a package from NuGet. We have a dependency on it through 2 different dependencies underneath us. So it's a transitive dependency in a couple places. One is under OmniSharp, which, if you remember, for the server is kind of like our base library that lets us write this LSP server. And I honestly don't remember what other dependency had this transitive dependency on system threading tasks. But there was an issue. The version specified that OmniSharp required would load on Windows and was 4200. It wasn't supposed to be. OmniSharp was requesting 4201, but there was an error in this older version of the system threading tasks package where the manifest said one thing. It depended on A, but it actually allowed the assembly cache to load in assembly version B. This seems like it should be fine because they were close enough. The other one was 4201 instead of 4200. But when the dependency on the other side of the tree over here came in and requested A, it was getting fed B because it's a global assembly cache. They're not isolated in that assembly load context. And it should never have had assembly B in the first place. That was kind of an error between the manifest and what like the actual DLL requested. And this caused this massive stack trace to bubble up. That usually just like looked like dry IOC. That was kind of a red herring. Stack trace was pages long, but people were running into this all the time. We were finally able to reproduce it by creating an environment where this other version of the dependency that we don't bring along and that OmniSharp isn't supposed to bring along, but when it exists on the machine because some other application installed it in the global assembly cache, when it was sitting there and it would erroneously get loaded, it would later break things. We were able to reproduce it. We were able to figure out, hey, that dependency under there is kind of broken. Why? We don't know why the manifest says A and it actually loads B, but we do know that a newer version of it does not do that anymore. So though it was a couple years long of like a bug that was just kind of haunting us, back when like Rob was here, this bug would still come up. People would file an issue and we were like, we kind of don't know. We can't seem to repro it. It's really cryptic. It shows up as like a missing method exception in OmniSharp. It just made no sense. Patrick and I got to the bottom of it, and seriously, huge thanks to Patrick for spending some hours debugging with me when we finally had like an inkling. When we had a repro environment, Patrick was like, wait, let's double check that DLL. Like, let's dive into it and see if it agrees with this manifest, because it turned out that it did not. The end fix was kind of simple. We updated the version that OmniSharp asked for, and then got the OmniSharp developers to give us a new package so that nothing ever requests the old buggy version of this dependency. And then everything worked. It's great. Things are working again, but that was quite the trip to get fixed. So anyway, if you ran into the big old dry IOC stack trace in the past trying to use Windows PowerShell, shouldn't happen anymore. As far as I can tell, most people that have gone and tried it have said, yes, this is finally working. I can finally use the extension with Windows PowerShell on my machine nowadays. So props to us, I guess, for fixing that. It was a doozy, and I'm pretty proud that we got to the bottom of it. So yeah, please go ahead and install the latest version of the extension. It's in a pretty good state. It's in the best state that it's ever been. We really like it. We're looking forward to working on more bug fixes, more regression tests, especially on the client side now with that renewed focus, and not forgetting, but I guess I should say I am forgetting to mention that we're going to be getting the shell integration of VS Code in hopefully in the next preview. We're working on integrating that. It wasn't as simple as just turning it on. We actually have to support it ourselves, but that will be an upcoming new fun feature. What kind of? It's a new feature of VS Code. It'll be new to us users of the extension when we integrate it. So yeah, thank you so much for trying it. As always, file bugs on GitHub. I actually quite love those because I love fixing them for you. If you have any questions, find us on the Discord or drop them in the chat here.
Hey, Andy, thank you so much. Thank you to both you and to Patrick. The tenacity, boy, that really pays off. Thank you. So, Sean, I've seen a lot of paperwork flying over on your side of the wall and a whole lot of PRs getting closed. Do you want to give us an update on docs?
Sure. Well, the docs team hasn't had a lot of changes to the docs this past month. But we've had a lot of but we've had a lot of community involvement, and I really want to call that out. So last month was Hacktoberfest. We ran a Hacktoberfest event, and it was pretty successful, especially considering the minimal way that we advertised it. What we've done now is we used that as a pilot, and we now have an evergreen project here for making quality contribution improvements. And this is an easy way to get started in open source and contributing to docs. If you're not comfortable contributing code or things like that, this is a great way to get started on some easy fixes. And this is, we've outlined several areas, and we describe the kind of work that we're asking for. One of the big ones was adding alias information for all commandlets that have aliases. And there's been a lot of work done in that space. Standardizing our formatting of code samples and all those kinds of things. And actually, this project is not just in the PowerShell docs repo. It spans all of the PowerShell docs repos for DSC and the other modules, includes Azure PowerShell and the Windows PowerShell docs repository, which actually needs a lot of help. So we really appreciate if you could, if folks would step in and help us out in those other areas. What we've done is we've created this project. You can go to the projects tab on our repo, and this tracks what's going on. The process here is you use our issue template to create a new issue, and here this is to commit to a quality contribution. So this is the one of those style work items. The idea here is you're signing up to do this work. You're specifying which articles that you're going to do. That way others know what's in process. And then you submit your pull request with the updates that you signed up for. And you could select multiples of these if you wanted to do multiple kinds of changes. And like I said, we track those through here, and I want to call out Emil Larson, is it, who's in the chat today in the meeting, was our biggest contributor over the past month and has continued to make contributions after Hacktoberfest. And we look forward to more. So great work there. And one other thing that we've added to our contributor guide here is this article on product and branding terminology and proper usage here. So this is something, if you're making docs contributions, you want to be sure to read and understand how we use our product names and when it's appropriate to use Windows PowerShell versus just PowerShell and so on. So those are the two big updates on the docs side of things. Looking forward to more contributions ongoing. And we're talking about doing a live Hackadoc session like this at PowerShell Summit. So we're still trying to figure out how that'll work, but looking forward to participation there as well. So I think that's what I have for docs.
Well, that's fantastic, but I also just want to point out, I really appreciate, Sean, all of the help on the bulk update to the Cloud Shell documentation that we've recently done. Folks, we're updating the Cloud Shell documentation as well to make sure that it's current and helpful for everybody. And so we've been doing a lot of work around that. So thank you very much. Next on my list is to have a discussion about PowerShell Get interface work, and I don't remember who's going to do that. I don't have it on my. Oh, hello, welcome. There we go.
Hey guys, I'm going to give an update about PowerShell Get since our last preview release. So since then, we've been working on performance improvements for PowerShell Get, especially for find and install scenarios. Currently, the PowerShell Get code uses NuGet client APIs, scenarios can be kind of efficient, and for big queries can also be kind of slow. So we've been doing work to switch this over to use HTTP client requests, and that is going to, significantly improve performance. In fact, we've seen that for fine scenarios, the queries we're running now are that we would, when we release, the queries that we would run are 8 times faster than in our last preview. So that's really exciting to see. And then to abstract this work, to use the HTTP client requests, we've also been adding interfaces for find and download APIs. And the bottom line is that it's going to help performance a lot. I also just wanted to say a big thanks to the community for feedback, and Justin's module fast, package, which he's going to demo later, is also really exciting to see just how fast and optimized V2 queries can be. So we're definitely trying to prioritize performance on our end, and I do want to mention that, but at the same time, we're also trying to balance compatibility requirements, but it is great to see the community feedback on that. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Now, as Steve had mentioned earlier, with the release of 7.3, there have been some issues around AZ PowerShell. And with that, Damien, are you here? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I'm here. So yes, I'm going to give a quick summary of what happened. So with PowerShell 7.3, relying on .NET 7, that has introduced a breaking change for the Azure PowerShell modules. Azure PowerShell modules are depending on a component called AutoMapper, and moving to PowerShell 7.3 has created a breaking change on those modules. We have 9-10 modules or so that have been impacted by that. The issue had been identified in July, and for some reason that we are still working on, we kind of missed the signal, and we're very sorry for that. Anyway, it's been done. We've been working in the last few days of getting a patch, and the good news is we have released a newer version of the modules a couple of hours ago. It's really fresh out of our build pipelines. They've been pushed in the gallery literally a couple of hours ago. And so the problem has been fixed, but you need to update to the latest version of the AZ PowerShell modules to get those. We are going to work on a post-mortem to understand how we have missed that issue. That was a signal in the summer, and we missed it. So we're going to look at that. We're also going to implement in our daily build pipeline the ability to test on the previews of PowerShell going forward. So we have a stronger signal if those things happen in the future. We're working on all of that. We will have some communication in the next few weeks. But I just wanted to give you a bit of an update on this one. I didn't have time to tweet yet, so it's that how fast it's been going on in the last few days.
Hey, thanks, Damien, especially for the hot off the presses release. That's awesome.
It's just fresh. So we had a few folks who tried and confirmed it was working. Please try it and let us know if you find any other issues. We are really looking at that very carefully.
Great, thank you. All right, now we're going to turn to a community update from Mike Kanakis. Mike, say hello.
Hey, everybody, how are you? So community updates this month are a little on the light side. I've been involved in lots of things and haven't been able to keep up on what the entire community is doing. So what I wanted to do was take a moment and recognize the community for coming out in force. PowerShell Summit just closed our CFP, and we had an overwhelming response, which was wonderful. It's been a tough go with the pandemic, and we had almost 200 submissions for talks this year. And that does not include anything that the PowerShell team is going to do. They are separate queue. And so cannot thank the community enough. I think you guys and girls should give yourselves some credit. And so, ladies and gentlemen, please, use the hand clap or thumbs up, and because many of the people that submitted are on this call, and we thank you very much. And so what does that mean for the community? What that means is come April, when we hold the summit and when PSConf4U does their event, I think you guys can pretty much guarantee an amazing lineup of speakers and demos this year. What that means is out of 175, 180 submissions. We have to whittle that down to probably 40 to 50. And so you can imagine the cream is going to rise to the top, and there's going to be some amazing things to come and see with PowerShell Summit, or if you go to PSConf.eu. And so you should start to mark your calendars and try to find budget to get to those events. They are going to be fantastic events this year. I assume we will do bigger and better as always. And so I'm really excited about that. But the goal here was to really say thank you to the community for coming out in force and helping us create another fantastic event.
Hey, thanks, Mike. And it just as a reminder to everybody, the PowerShell Summit, both NA in April and then the EU conference, which is in June. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, these conferences are alive and growing back after the pandemic. So mark your calendars, as Mike said, and take a look. We're going to do our very best to attend those as much as live as possible, both engineering and PM when possible. So we look forward to seeing everyone at those events going forward. Very excited actually about those events. And thanks to everybody at PowerShell.org for all the hard work. Now it's time for us to turn to demos, and I think we've got a couple of demos today, and I think first on the list is Justin Grody. Hey, Justin. I know you're out there somewhere.
Hey guys,
there
how you
you
doing?
go.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
That's okay.
How's everybody doing today? I'm going to go ahead and get sharing here. So yeah, I wanted to share a little project that I've been working on. This is something that I did a couple of years ago to kind of start and wanted to kind of enhance it. So this is a thing I made called Module Fast. So the idea behind this, and I hope you can see my screen okay. Is that right, Jason?
Yeah, looks great.
Okay. So what I did was that I had a very common requirement that I had where for things like GitHub Actions or other things, I always had a requirement where I kind of needed to pre-install some modules, get all my dependencies together to get to install. And so with PowerShell Get, several years ago with PowerShell Get version 2, just the way that it works and the way a lot of things are serial, and because it was kind of very much designed to be like compatible and safe and that kind of thing. It has a tendency to kind of take a little while because it kind of checks every step. And so I wanted to kind of break that down and see like, well, what if we took some of that stuff out and made it a little more fast and loose and utilize some techniques that we can use to do a lot of stuff in parallel. And so that's where the idea of Module Fast came from. So Module Fast is a PowerShell script. In fact, I'm going to load it right here. You can do this right here by just doing this. I'm going to emphasize right now, this is untrusted code from the internet. Do not do this unless you actually go to it and read it. But I'm just going to show you an example. You can bring it up and you can read all the code and see what it does. It's just a couple, think about 1,200 lines of code right now. And the main reason for that being is that I didn't want any external dependencies. It's all written in PowerShell. There's no C#. There's no modules that have to load because it's meant to be there as sort of a bootstrap. So we go ahead and we do that and we load that. And we got it there. You see it's in real quick. So now we have this command, install Module Fast, we can do. And we'll do one of my favorite modules, import Excel. And of course, every commandlet should support what if. So when I do a what if here, you can see there real fast in that short, just 500 milliseconds, it went out to the gallery. It found the module information, it resolved its dependencies, and then a little extra thing for the thing gave me a little extra plan when I do a what if of what's going to be installed. So let's do that again. If I do this with verbose, you can see a little more detail about what it did. And we can go ahead and do, we can see it's there. And if we do again, we do it with debug, we can actually see the individual API calls that it's making. And so you can see here that we started our own custom HTTP client. It uses HTTP2 and HTTP3 on the back end, so that helps speed things up a lot in terms of the processing. And it uses like asynchronous tasks to fan these things out and come back in. But if you look at the code, it's all just PowerShell. It's all using that HTTP client that was talked about a little bit earlier, which is sort of the underlying engine in .NET that powers things like invoke web request and invoke REST method, and just sort of using that in its very, very raw form to make things really fast. And so you can see here going through, making the calls, making a fetch. Now you'll notice this address is the special preview.pwsh gallery. So what this is that, as was mentioned, there's a big difference between NuGet version 2 and NuGet version 3. Version 2 is all sort of XML based, it's sort of OData based, but it's also largely undocumented. So NuGet version 3, which is what most of the module repositories use now, is all super well documented on Microsoft's site. It's all JSON based, and JSON works really well with PowerShell. And so working with 2 and 3 kind of got annoying. And so I decided to build this thing in Cloudflare workers called preview.pwsh.gallery. It's actually PWSH Gallery. So Cloudflare workers are this sort of Azure functions like serverless way to build really, really fast applications. So this is written in TypeScript, but what it does is it allows me to make a interface that just, as you make a query here, like if you go to this Azure Synapse, it automatically, what happened in the background in that really fast time period is actually went out to the PowerShell Gallery, did a query against it on its version 2 API, and then translated that to the version 3 API, and then stripped out all the extra stuff about the description and the links and all that stuff, and only gives me the information that I need to resolve versions. And so that allows the query to be really fast. Because it's on Cloudflare, it just supports HTTP version 3 out of the box. And it also supports fancy things like Brotli compression, which allows for much faster transitions. And now that we have PowerShell 7.3, which supports .NET 7, .NET 7 supports HTTP 3 out of the box. So this whole conversation that happens back and forth can all happen really, really fast. So this is all just a preamble to show what this now enables things to do. So I have the ability now to go ahead and, as I showed there, let's try a few more modules. So let's start with all our favorite, the AZ module, which a lot of people know can take, with the existing PowerShell Get, takes about 2 minutes, 30 minutes, 3 minutes to install. So first we'll just do a what if to develop a plan. So you'll see here, there in about 1 second, none of this is cached. That was in 1 second, it went out to my little proxy. That proxy hammered PowerShell Gallery with queries of all this information and was able to build a plan for how to install this module. So in 1 second, we have a plan. So over here on my left, we have my local PowerShell module folder. And I'm just going to go ahead and actually do the install this time. So it's going to do the plan. It has to be, of course, because this is an action. It's like, do you want to do this? You can do confirm false if you want to just force this and say, yes, I want to do it. Don't ask me. And so there it goes installing. And at this point, it's basically streaming directly from the PowerShell Gallery CDN, reading it into memory, and then using a thing in .NET called streams, which you can totally leverage in PowerShell. You don't have to use C# to do it. And basically stream that data, transparently decompress it on the fly, and then land it onto my disk. So in 15 seconds, I have every single AZ module installed onto my computer. And you can see here if I do, like my GMO list available. Probably should narrow that to AZ. It's going to take longer to find them, but you can see they're all there, ready to use, all active and ready to go. So, and these are all actually visible with things like, as you saw, Git module, as well as Git PS resource. The modules get installed in such a way that they are just like how they get installed with the PowerShell module, and so they're all manageable the same way. So let's try that with a little bit larger item. Let's delete these items here. So there's a list of, just as an experiment, I ran another query that basically searched the entire PowerShell Gallery and found everything. And there's a question from Ryan, what's my download speed? I've done this in a test in an Azure virtual machine, and it goes even faster. That 15 seconds is just my laptop here on my Wi-Fi at my house, it's about 500 down, give or take, but it's not like the most reliable, like lag-free connection. So this works really well in any sort of aspect in that regard. And because it uses HTTP version 3, if you have the newest version of Windows, you have to be on Windows 11 22H2, like the latest version. But if you do that, then it'll use HTTP version 3, which has a lot of error correction and stuff to handle that kind of stuff. Otherwise, it uses HTTP version 2, and it uses HTTP version 1 if you don't have support for 2, like if you're going through a proxy or stuff. But you don't really see many of the benefits unless you're on HTTP version 2 or version 3. So now I'm going to go ahead and do this plan. So I just did a search on the PowerShell Gallery for what are the modules that have the most dependencies. And it turns out that these sort of 4 modules have a lot of dependencies between them. So let's see what that looks like. If I do a what if on that, you'll see it goes through and resolve. So these 4 modules together have like 530 dependencies, and it keeps going up there, as you see. And so it's going to go through, it's going to resolve those, get an idea of them. And so here's a list of all the modules that are going to be installed. But to resolve those 500 modules to install took about 10 seconds. Often it can take even less time. We run it again. This is now cached on the gallery side. And so even though because I'm streaming my desktop, there's a lot of extra CPU happening here that's not able to handle it. It tends to go even faster. But if I would do this in my Azure machine, typically this is even less than that. Let's go ahead and see what happens for this full install without the whatever. We're just going to go install. We'll take confirm false off. And it's going to do that same resolution. And while this is installing, Ryan says a lot of places still have 20 UK or less in parts of the UK. Yeah, so while that is the case, A lot of the slowness that happens with PowerShell Get has to do with the back and forth serial, like query this, okay, and then query that. By making these things happen in parallel, it'll all come down much more quickly. And so even if you're slower, it makes sure that it utilizes your bandwidth fully. It's not just sitting there waiting while it evaluates something or waiting for a small gallery response. So you can see there in 27 seconds, we just installed 500 modules. And so if I go to the properties of this folder, let's see how much size is that. So, that's 1.2 gigabytes of modules in 30 seconds. So that's module fast. It's just a demo of how things can be, as well as I plan to build it out so that it's primarily targeted for CI/CD scenarios where you care more about getting everything installed and less about that. There's a question from Mark about, does it update modules? Yes, it does. So once I've actually done the install, if I do this again, once everything's installed, you'll notice that took less than a second. And in fact, what you'll see in the background, what happened here, is that it can actually evaluate the modules if they're already locally installed. And if your version criteria matches what you have, I specified these as just the names, which basically says, just give me the latest version. But you can also specify module spec versions where you can do that whole @name = AZ required version or maximum version, and it will do an evaluation on that. So if you only want modules up to a certain version, it will automatically do that. And you can build a PSD1 that's sort of like a declarative manifest of, I want these modules at these versions for a project, and it will restore and respect that. And by default, it follows a resolution module that, like, if everything that satisfies your criteria are locally installed, like if you just say 1.0 and newer and 1.8 is installed, it'll treat that as okay, great, it meets the spec. But if you have like that and you have a module spec that says I need 1.9 and newer, but only 1.8 is installed, it will go and build a plan and only install like that one piece that needs to be installed. So I take inspiration from Terraform for this. It does a plan first and then it does an apply. And you can see what the plan is with that what if command. And so in this case, there's going to be nothing to install because all the modules are installed. So this allows you could do this against your entire PowerShell Gallery thing. And the main difference is, like, if you want to skip this, you can do a -update, or excuse me, I have that in the next version that I have, but you basically just do a -update and it basically skips that local check and just verifies if the latest version out there matches your local version. So it's just sort of a way to kind of take the concepts of like Terraform and declarative like infrastructure as code and apply them to how you install your modules, and then just utilize some of the power that exists in the HTTP client to do all the installation. And again, if you look at the code, it's all in PowerShell. It only uses run spaces for one step, which is that unzipping part. And that's only because the unzipping part in .NET has to happen in a sequential manner. And so we actually have to break that out into threads, and that helps so that we can make sure we utilize all the cores on our machine. Everything else happens using what's called asynchronous programming, where everything actually happens on the main thread, where it fans it out to say, PowerShell says, hey, go do these things, but then it sits there and it checks in on it, says what's done, and when something comes back, it can act on that task and continue to work. Basically, the same way if you know C#, a lot of how like the async await syntax works in C#, but sort of translating that work into PowerShell without having all of the niceties of it. So it allows things to be really fast. It makes them really easy to debug because everything comes back. The stuff doesn't happen in run spaces. You don't have to try to get into that run space and figure out what's happening. It's kind of a neat way for all that to work. So I plan to talk about this some more at PowerShell Summit and maybe PSConf, dig into the internals of how it works. But if you want to try it out, feel free. Just know that it is very, very alpha. It's my GitHub repository, github.com/justingrody/modulefast. You can try it out, tweak the code. Just know it is pre-alpha. It's changing all the time, breaking changes constantly. Do not rely on this for production. Do not rely on this for anything. But if you want to see how it works and play with it, it's a pretty neat thing. I plan to eventually have this to a point where it's kind of meant as like a CI/CD helper, where like if you're doing your tests in GitHub Actions, just a way to get your modules down much faster. And the last thing I want to emphasize on is that this is a really fast and dirty way to install modules. It skips a lot of checks, although it does a lot of things that are important. And it does a lot of things. It doesn't have to meet all the criteria that PowerShell Get does. For instance, this doesn't work in PowerShell 5.1 because I want to use newer stuff. This only works in 7.2 and up. So all the work that's happening in PowerShell Get supports all of those different scenarios, makes things very easy for people to transition. And that focus that PowerShell always has is on compatibility, that once you learn how to do something once, you don't have to relearn it. So a lot of the stuff that happens in the PowerShell Get team is not supplanted by this. This is just sort of like an add-on tool to help all of that really, really great work that's happening with PowerShell Get version 3. And PowerShell Get version 3 will get faster. As mentioned, there's the performance improvements that kind of look at some of these things that can be improved. This is just a way to be like, hey, if we just throw everything away and we were starting from scratch, how could we build this in a way that's like as fast as possible? And that was just sort of like an exercise to do that. And that's what Module Fast is. So I'm probably well over my time, but thanks very much. And yeah, I'm always available in chat and on Twitter and on the Discord if you have any questions about how it works. Thank you.
Wow, Justin, I'm going to have to sit here for a second and catch my breath. But while I'm catching my breath, would you mind dropping a link into your GitHub Fast module thing into chat? And thank you. That was an amazing demonstration. Next up, my friend Mike Kanakis is going. I don't know what you're going to demo, Mike, but go for it.
Well, let's just start with lowering the bar quite a bit. Always, I have to say, I'm always quite amazed by Justin's wizardry, but hate the enviable position of having to follow that. So yeah. Let's see if we can have some fun. Justin seems to always do the bleeding edge stuff, and I always try to recognize people that are doing some interesting stuff in the community that people haven't seen. And so, hey, guys and girls, who remembers having fun spamming friends with send mail message? I know that I've had lots of fun with that, right? In all seriousness, if you've been using send mail message to create automation for the last couple of years, if you've ever looked at the command when you run, there's always a warning message that comes and says, hey, this is a deprecated command. And so the time has come where send mail message is basically being put out to the pasture because it uses basic auth. And so if you want to replicate send mail message, you need to work with the Graph API. And if you're like me, who is not a code master and fumbles through his stuff, sometimes you want the easy button. And so I had spent a few weeks trying to cut my teeth on the Graph module and doing all the authentication and stuff, and wanted to send HTML email for things we do at work for automation, and it's not fun. It's not an easy process. It's just not the same as send mail message and having a commandlet with a few params. And so, you know, when I was younger, I probably would sit there and say, let me code up something and make a module. But for once, I used my brain and said, let me look to see what's in the community. And after doing some searching, I stumbled across two modules. I'm going to paste them in here just so people have the name, and then I'll do a quick demo. And so these modules are from I can't pronounce his name, Przemysław Klee. You guys probably know him as Evotech. He's an MVP based out of Poland. And honestly, the guy builds some amazing modules. And so rather than reinvent the wheel, I want to show what you can do with his modules. And just so you guys know, I am just like you. I submitted for the summit. I have to get picked. And if I get any luck, maybe we'll talk about this at the summit in a little bit deeper dive here. So what we're trying to do here is send mail with the Graph API, but try to do it as easy as you can with send mail message. And so what we have here is a basic script. And so the beginning part of the script is just pulling credentials and creating objects to pass. And so you see, this is really just client stuff, right? But at the end of the day, here I am, I'm making a subject, a to, a from, and then I'm making some connections. And then so what Evotech has done is built two modules. One handles the auth to the Graph API in an elegant way that's much more PowerShell friendly than you probably are used to if you don't want to deal with things like JSON and embedded HTML code inside of a JSON object. He makes that really easy. So he has the mail, Oz, or module, and that handles the authentication. And then if you do a little more digging on his site, he's created a module called PS Write HTML, which basically abstracts all the HTML that you would have to normally code, and he's parameterized it all so you can just use PowerShell to create HTML code, and that gets passed in. So what we're going to see today is a simple example of that. And so here we go. Here is a super simple email body. And so this is email text with a text parameter, and just say, hi, everyone. And so what these modules allow you to do is at the end of the day, you get to use a commandlet like this, which I think most people will say is much more PowerShell friendly than the similar Graph credential that has to do a lot of OAuth authentication. And so what you can do with this when you run this is you can send an email, right? And so what's going to happen here, if I pop on over here, hopefully things will work fast. Come on, here we go. There's.
It's prompting for your password.
Oh, secret vault. Oh yeah, baby, kicking in like it should. Thank you. There we go. And so if we come over here, we should get a refresh here. We should get a refresh here. Yeah, okay, so here we go. I just sent a simple email. Nothing fancy. The magic happens when you want to do something a little more complex. And so we switch here from a simple email body and we start to do more advanced stuff. And so what I've done here is I've created an email body that has a line break, has bold, I can decorate with an underline, I can embed a link. It's essentially markdown, right? Here I'm bolding a line, here I'm doing an ordered mail list. And notice there's no HTML in here at all. And so I just pass this in as an email body into the thing here, and the module does all the work for me. So let me just switch to my variable here. And so I do that and make sure I'm set. And so now when I rerun my script here, if we get a second email, come on, there we go. And so look at that. I've made a simple email body with bold links, and an embedded list, with almost no work at all, not having to know any code at all. And so if you're interested in this, take a look at his website. I have to say his documentation could use a little help. And so I'm thinking about jumping in and writing some help files for him. But the guy writes fantastic modules and he solves problems like this. And hoping to talk about this more at the summit. We'll do a deeper dive into the whole auth piece and all the cool things you can do with HTML. But if you're looking to replace or augment what you used to do with send mail message and need an easy way to do it, take a look at these two modules. You can really do some cool stuff. And I'm done.
Hey, thanks, Mike. And that's about perfect timing, ladies and gentlemen, as we are very close to the end here. But let's take a moment. If you have any last minute questions that you would like to ask, and in a strange form of community working together, I think we've managed to answer all of the existing questions out there, but please, somebody point something out if I've missed something. So we'll give everybody a minute. Go ahead and type something in, or you can put it into the actual issue that we have, but it seems like everybody's just typing right into chat. Just as a reminder, if you're going to go ahead and type in a question, as a reminder, this is our last community call for the year. And we expect to, oh, great. Okay, cool. And we expect to see everybody back in January. I'm not seeing any additional questions at this time. So with this, we're going to go ahead and end the call. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful set of holidays. Have a wonderful year. And we'll see you back in January for the first community call for 2023. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone. Great day.